Since 1764 novel The Castle of Otranto, widely regarded as the first Gothic text, describing a work of literature or media as Gothic has only become more complex. The dilapidated castle, haunting apparitions, and a villainous male preying on a young woman are all elements presented by Horace Walpole that we now regard to be Gothic. In the late 1700s leading into the 1800s, authors including Anne Radcliffe, Mary Shelley, Edgar Allan Poe, Oscar Wilde, and of course Bram Stoker elaborated on these and defined the Gothic novel genre. In 1897, Bram Stoker's novel Dracula was published, and it became the face of vampires in literature. 117 years later, the 2014 film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night continues to explore the Gothic and vampirism, with a range of variations and similarities in its implementation. The chapter Introduction Negative Aesthetics by Fred Botting offers a useful foundation for articulating the Gothic in both of these works, as well as the diverse range of contextual components entwined with the genre. To begin, what characterizes something as Gothic? Botting goes into great lengths about some of the qualities of the Gothic at its inception, as well as in more recent contexts. The Gothic evolved in the 18th century as a reaction to Europe's Enlightenment period. Knowledge and rationality, as well as the idea of bettering humanity through these approaches, were esteemed during the Enlightenment. In contrast, set in the Dark Ages and distinctly irrational, Gothic works became the dark to this light. Characters confront superstitious figures, question their sanity, and demonstrate a lack of morality. The settings are gloomy and menacing, with a feudal aesthetic. The notion of doubling in the Gothic, in which characters are split, typically into good and evil, is related to this conflict of the dark and the light also. Doubling may be a literal doppelganger, two people that reflect each other, or a figure like Lucy in Dracula, who gains a human and vampire form. Much of the Gothic framework was derived from folklore, but as it continued over history, it began to incorporate ideas from psychoanalysis, particularly Sigmund Freud. This was perhaps due to the idea of disturbances in the mind seen in the Gothic being relevant to its original explorations of otherworldly and occult fears, to things like delusions and apparitions being explainable as psychological. At the root of Gothic fear, Botting suggests Gothic texts operate ambivalently. The dynamic interrelation of limit and transgression, prohibition and desire suggests that norms, limits, boundaries and foundations are neither natural nor absolutely fixed or stable despite the fears they engender. A Gothic text hinges on transgression and the subversion of something traditional. While the Gothic does have frightening elements, such as the existence of monsters, the true terror of the Gothic lies in the mind. The sturdiness of society's ideals and norms are challenged, playing on the fear of societal limits being cast aside. This then allows for unvirtuous behaviour and the perception of threat from those that are different. This may be observed in Dracula, where the vampire represents a Western dread of Eastern dominance and culture, and in A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which victimizes patriarchal figures. So let's first take a closer look at Dracula. Stoker engages with a variety of interesting Gothic elements. Dracula's castle, ancient and ruined, Dr. John Stewart's lunatic asylum that's right next door to Dracula's newly bought property, and sublime landscapes both beautiful and menacing, all embodying the Gothic. Furthermore, we have the novel's threat of becoming monstrous in the form of vampires. However, the introductory character of Jonathan Harker does slightly subvert what might be a standard male response to this threat. Instead, he is the damsel in distress in Dracula's castle, facing not just Dracula but also the three female vampires' seduction. When Harker returns to London, Lucy and Mina are the ones who are threatened, reflecting that Harker's presence in foreign Transylvania was contextually also a Western fear of foreign way of life, and that the return to traditional was women to be in danger. This has a wider bearing on the distaste for the new woman discussed throughout the novel, that frowned upon women's roles changing to be more independent and, as Botting states, the construction of feminine sexuality as monstrous. While Dracula utilizes Gothic conventions, Stoker intertwines the novel with new technologies, which would be more aligned with Enlightenment. Dracula contains tools like a typewriter, an early voice recorder, and the Harkers' use of shorthand throughout their journals. This has an impact on the text's apostolary nature, as well as the characters' discovery of Dracula and vampirism. The characters throughout are critical of their suspicions, and their rationality leads to misfortune, particularly for Lucy and Mina. Overall, Dracula relied on several Gothic standards, but as the genre values itself, subverts various elements that distinguish it against other Gothic texts and vampire novels that came before but are much less infamous. The film A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is a black and white vampire western. It features a female vampire that preys on bad men in a fictional Iranian city named Bad City. In terms of the Gothic genre, this very basic description already subverts a lot. Female vampire and patriarchal structures in the Gothic, as well as how a non-Western perspective impacts various conventions, are just some of the most prevalent ideas in this film. Botting writes that displaying and even enjoying arbitrary male power in the persecution of women, threats of violence, murder, or imprisonment remain recurrent, apparent, and abhorrent issues in Gothic fictions. The girl is the main threat throughout the film, mostly to the men. Men who abuse women are punished, with Saeed and Hassan both abusing Addie, who the girl takes on a protective role towards. The main storyline, however, regards the girl and Arash, who you as the audience watch as he gets closer and closer to the girl, anxious to see if he will be drained as well. He survives because he isn't a bad man. Arash is a submissive protagonist. Those who are a threat to him are slain by the girl, even if she is not specifically killing them for Arash. In terms of Gothic characterization, he is practically feminized in this regard. The key gender difference, however, is that the girl wears a chador. It serves as a reminder of the setting and cultural expectations of Iranian women, as well as the manner of re-evaluating what many, particularly in the West, deem sexist about the garment. Here, it's the girl's Dracula cloak, keeping her hidden from her prey and establishing a sinister, haunting figure in the frame. It's crucial for producing that Gothic atmosphere, as well as a distinctly non-Western quality that would have been a symbol of the intrusive East in original Gothic texts. So A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night not only conveys transgression just in its general premise, but it also develops an innovative approach to Gothic works, particularly for non-Western women. Both texts succeed in evoking the Gothic, as well as confronting the role of women in the genre and influence of Western fears. Although modern Gothic understandings of these principles have changed, they still serve as the foundation for much of the Gothic's understanding of fear. From humble beginnings, the Gothic has now influenced a huge variety of genres, the most well-known of which is horror, but it also influences drama, science fiction, and has its own cultural versions, such as Australian or Canadian Gothic, which include colonization as a prevalent theme. It demonstrates that the inceptive Gothic terrors discussed by Botting are still relevant: irrationality, the unknown, and the inability to trust one's own mind.